All right, today we're diving into a landmark Canadian Supreme Court case that, honestly, sounds like it was ripped right from a movie script. It's the story of R.V. Beaudry, and it's all about what happens when two of a police officer's most fundamental duties go head-to-head.
At its core, this whole thing boils down to one single, incredibly high-stakes question. What happens when an officer's duty to enforce the law smacks right into their duty to help someone who's clearly in crisis? Well, that's the exact ethical minefield Sergeant Elaine Beaudry found himself in one night, and it kicked off a legal battle that went all the way to the top.
You know, this entire decade-long legal fight, it all starts with one chaotic traffic stop in the dead of night. So get this. It's about 3:30 in the morning when Sergeant Beaudry spots this minivan just flying down the road on a flat tire. He gives chase, the van blows right through a stop sign, almost slams into a median. I mean, it's a mess. When the van finally stops, the driver, a guy named Patrick Plord, is completely falling apart. He's crying, not making any sense, and even banging his head on the steering wheel. And then, the big twist. Plord tells them he's a cop too. And just as they're trying to get a handle on the situation, they smell alcohol. Suddenly, this isn't just a bizarre traffic stop, it's a potential DUI. And this is the exact moment where the story splits into two completely different realities. What Sergeant Beaudry did next was either a totally legitimate act of compassion or it was a criminal cover-up. On one side, you've got Beaudry's defense, and it was pretty straightforward. He said, look, I saw a fellow officer who was clearly having a massive mental health crisis. This guy needed help, not a criminal charge. He argued his decision not to give a breathalyzer was a reasonable use of what's called police discretion. But the Crown? Oh, they saw it very, very differently. They said this was a textbook case of favoritism, that Beaudry intentionally dodged collecting evidence for one reason and one reason only, to protect another cop. And that, they argued, is obstructing justice. You can imagine, his boss wanted to know where the heck the impaired driving report was. This was Sergeant Beaudry's explanation. He framed his choice as picking compassion over punishment. But the question is, was that a choice he was legally allowed to make?
To answer that, we actually have to zoom out for a second and talk about the big legal idea at the center of this whole thing: police discretion. So, what in the world is police discretion? Well, simply put, it's the freedom we give police officers to use their own judgment out in the field. You know, our justice system gets that you can't have a strict rule for every single complicated human situation. An officer might decide to give a kid a warning for shoplifting instead of arresting them, for example. The Supreme Court even said that a system without discretion would be totally unworkable and rigid. But, and this is a huge but, that power is not a blank check. The Supreme Court has laid out some really clear rules. The decision can't be made in secret. It has to be based on reasonable facts, not on personal bias or, importantly, favoritism. And here's the kicker. It has to serve the public interest and be something a totally neutral person would look at and say, yeah, that seems justifiable. Okay, so with all that in mind, the Supreme Court basically built a legal test to figure out if Sergeant Beaudry had crossed the line from using his discretion properly to actually obstructing justice. They came up with a specific two-step analysis. Think of it like a simple flowchart. First, you ask, was what the officer did a proper use of discretion, following all those rules we just talked about? If the answer is yes, then that's it. Game over. The officer was just doing their job. But if the answer is no, if it was not a proper use of discretion, then you go to step 2. Did that improper action actually get in the way of the justice system? Now, here's the most important part. Even if an officer's actions fail both parts of that test, it's still not automatically a crime. The prosecution has to prove one more thing, and it's a big one: specific intent. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the officer meant to obstruct justice. An honest mistake, even a really bad judgment call, is not enough to send a cop to jail. There has to be a corrupt motive. Okay, so armed with that legal playbook, let's head back to Sergeant Beaudry. How did the courts actually apply this test to what happened that night? Well, the trial judge, the one who saw all the witnesses testify, just flat out didn't buy Beaudry's story. He called the whole mental health explanation something that seemed thought of after the fact. And he pointed to the evidence. Beaudry had tried to file the incident report under assistance to the public, which kind of buries what really happened. Plus, the judge figured if you're really that worried about someone's mental health, wouldn't you take them to a hospital? In the end, the judge came to a simple conclusion. Beaudry's real motive was to give a fellow cop a break. So when this case finally lands at the Supreme Court of Canada, the decision is razor thin. We're talking a 5-4 split among the 9 justices. That right there tells you just how tough and complex this whole thing was. The 5 judges in the majority basically said, look, it's not our job to second-guess the trial judge who actually saw and heard the witnesses. They felt he was in the best position to decide who was telling the truth, and his conclusion that Beaudry had a corrupt intent was totally reasonable based on the evidence. But wow, the 4 judges who disagreed, they did not hold back. They called the trial judge's reasoning manifestly bad. They pointed out that Beaudry wasn't hiding everything. He did file reports that mentioned Plord was intoxicated. For them, the evidence just wasn't strong enough to prove that corrupt motive beyond a reasonable doubt.
But in the end, a majority is a majority. The appeal was dismissed. Sergeant Alain Beaudry's conviction for obstructing justice was upheld.
So why are we digging up a case from years ago? Because the Beaudry decision has a massive, lasting impact on policing in Canada today.
The Beaudry case is now the gold standard. It's the definitive ruling that balances 2 huge ideas. Police need the independence to make tough calls, but they are absolutely accountable for how they make them. And this isn't just some dusty legal theory. This decision directly shapes how new officers are trained on ethics. It's the rulebook Internal Affairs uses to investigate misconduct, and it's the test prosecutors apply when they suspect a cop has crossed the line. It literally draws a bright, unmissable line in the sand between a legitimate, compassionate decision and an illegal, corrupt favor.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with the same impossible question that split the highest court in the country. In the heat of the moment, for the people we trust with so much power, where exactly is that line between compassion and corruption? And maybe more importantly, who gets to draw it?